Hello everybody, and here is our next video where we're going to once again change things up a little bit. We're still going to do the should you pickups like last week, not nearly as many, and obviously we're missing someone. Yeah, Amari Cooper, we just traded him away. No, we're missing Bryn. We literally just traded him to the NFL Network for, I can't even think of that guy's name anymore. The guy who does their fantasy stuff.
Adam Rank?
Yeah, that's his name.
Yes,
yeah, we traded Bryn for Adam Rank.
Adam Rank will be here next week. We're really excited and looking forward to it, to bring his knowledge with us. Apparently he loves wrestling, so do we.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a really good fit.
And we'll say we do wish Bryn the best in his future endeavors at this point.
Yes, we do wish him well. Apparently he already got fired, from what we understand, for the NFL Network. Apparently they were told that they can't handle his sexiness. We get it.
We got it.
Bryn. If you want a job back here, no.
No.
Sorry.
Wow. You know, people are going to watch this and think we actually fired him on air, like we're actually paying or making money on this or anything. The two people who watch this are going to be very concerned.
If you are a Bryn fan, please comment below that you want Bryn back, and we will consider bringing him back. But Bryn is still on special duty. If you watched our peak video, you know that he is on Le'Veon Bell watch.
No, Bryn, you're not supposed to be watching Amari Cooper. It's Le'Veon Bell. God, he's messing everything up.
Who is still not reported to Pittsburgh camp. At this point, Bryn might really be out of a job. So,
I'll have to get him to really start putting Le'Veon Bell watch now up on our Facebook and stuff. Just for the heck of it. That'll be Bryn actually posted on
I
there.
just had like pictures of Bryn like on a field.
Just not even the real football field. Just like literally in the middle of the field going, Le'Veon Bell. But anyway, what we're doing today is, like I said, we're doing a couple things. We're going to try to keep it fresh. We're not going to do the same thing every week. So this week, we got completely rid of the drop and the pickups and the trades and
The
all that
starts
stuff.
and the sits.
Which we didn't even do that last week. But this week we're going to do a little bit talking of should you pick up, a couple people of should you drop, and then our bold prediction. And then we'll go from there. It could turn into arguments. Maybe we'll agree. Maybe we won't. Who knows? But I think it would be best to start with the should you drops. So basically we're going to go through with a couple of names who, one way or another, had a rough week, have had a couple of rough weeks or anything. And we're going to go back and forth, and we're going to discuss these people and say, should you drop them? Should they be on your roster? Are they worth it anymore? And I will say, I think all the people that we have on here are people that are owned on ESPN by more than 50% of the leagues.
Yeah, we tried to keep it to a point where people actually have them on their rosters. We didn't want to pick someone that's owned in less than 5%.
So should you drop Mark Gallup?
Michael Gallup.
Michael Gallup. Yeah. Should we drop?
Well, definitely not. You should definitely drop him now.
I was going to say he's probably not worth it anymore. Would that be, well, I guess Cole Beasley's value might go up. Anyway, because he's slot. He's back to the slot. He's not the number one receiver anymore. Yeah. So we'll start. I'll start with the first one here. And my first one's kind of, it's a tougher one. Just because the first big trade before the Amari Cooper one was a random trade where the Jaguars made a trade. But not for a quarterback, because they don't need a quarterback. And as you can see, their quarterback position is well in hand after this week.
Right. Eli Manning will be in Jersey next week.
So the Jaguars traded for Carlos Hyde, who was the Browns starter and was looking pretty decent for the most part this season so far. Now he has gone to Jacksonville. We don't know how long Fournette's going to be out. Apparently the coaches are getting really frustrated with it at this point. Who knows? TJ Yeldon has, for the most part, looked really good in his time away. Maybe not the rushing yards per se, but catching touchdown passes and getting it in there.
Right.
But where does Carlos Hyde fit in? Is he worth, at this point, keeping on your roster, if you're saying he was your number one guy, and I know people who he was, going into the season, do you keep him on the roster and see what Jacksonville does, or do you replace him immediately?
I mean, he's definitely worth keeping on your bench because Leonard Fournette, as of right now, is not coming back till after the bye week.
So that gives you the London week.
So that gives you the London game this week. He was inactive last week, but again, you can't really expect a running back to learn the playbook in 2 days.
2 days.
So I really think this London game will kind of be a really big indication of where he kind of falls. Like you said, TJ Yeldon has not played bad. But TJ Yeldon in our offense is definitely the change of pace back. He's not the first down, second down, early runner. That's why they brought Carlos Hyde in. And even when Leonard Fournette comes back, it's a hamstring injury. And those are extremely tricky, you know.
Believe me, I know with my team too, with Dalvin Cook at the exact same time.
You know, he takes off, the next 2 weeks, comebacks, and who's to say he doesn't re-injure that same hamstring? Because it's the same kind of hamstring that's been bothering him in college too. So I'm not saying drop Carlos Hyde. I think he's definitely you should definitely keep him on your bench. He's not someone I'm starting this week unless you desperately need help at running back.
Which is possible.
I mean, and plus, even if he does start this week, he's going up against an Eagles front four that has not been kind to running backs. So for me, I'm not starting Carlos Hyde, but I'm definitely not going to drop him just yet.
See, I'm on the complete opposite. With that matchup that he has, and with the fact that he went from starting running back to pretty much a handcuff at this point, unless you have Leonard Fournette on your team, unless you have him and you somehow were able to pick up Carlos Hyde, because I'm telling you, he was owned by probably about 75% of leagues going into this week. I don't think Carlos Hyde's worth having on your bench. You have a lot of young running backs on the market who you could start this week. You got your Jalen Richards out there. You got your whoever's starting in Buffalo at this point, because it doesn't look like LaShawn McCoy's going to play this week. There's another team that had
more starter.
You have Latavius Murray, who may or may not be able to say, yeah. You got Mostert, who, once again, Matt Breida for the third week in a row injured his ankle on the first play of the game. So you got a lot of guys out there this week that may not be your sexy starters, but you have your people out there who could be good starters, and I think Carlos Hyde just a waste of spot at that point. So I think you should cut Carlos Hyde.
Fair enough. My first should you drop is the Buccaneers running back Peyton Barber. Keep in mind, he has been the starter for Buffalo. For Tampa Bay.
Might as well be at this point.
Yeah, might as well be Buffalo. He's only gone over 10 fantasy points in one game, and that was not this week, but the week prior. He had 20 fantasy points. He had a really good game. He's owned in over 60% of leagues. He's struggling to run the football. Plus, with the Bucs defense being so bad, they are constantly falling behind. They have to change the game script. And Ronald Jones just had his first touchdown last week. They brought him in to be the starter. I know he's kind of struggled with injuries. The coaching staff really hasn't trusted him enough to really get him involved in the offense, but you have to think moving forward at some point he is going to take over that backfield.
Has to.
So to me, Peyton Barber is a prime candidate to drop. Again, I know he's a starter, but like Danny said earlier, there's a lot of young, more talented backs who are actually getting more opportunity. So for me, Peyton Barber is definitely someone that at this point I think you can comfortably drop.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, at this point, if Peyton Barber is on your roster this week, you have more problems than just your running back. Your roster's beat up. Peyton Barber's not one. I almost guarantee that he didn't get drafted in most leagues, and if he did, it was the final round. He's not someone who has had many good weeks, like you stated. He's not really worth it. The main reason you have on his team is for depth and hoping that he even puts up enough points that you could trade him, or just because you had bye weeks this week and you needed someone on there, which is why he was on my roster for a very short time this week. So yeah, Peyton Barber, don't waste a spot on him. They're not running the ball out there in Tampa. He's not worth it.
Yeah, and you're basically praying for a touchdown punt play at that point by starting.
And he's worthless. But I'll jump to one that did get drafted high, that did have a lot going into this season, and that would be Royce Freeman, who all the talk, and I think I made the argument against him in a different way than I thought was going to happen. I made the Devontae Booker argument against him, to basically where I said he was a starter, why would you draft Royce Freeman? And wasn't it like top 5 rounds or something like that? It was really early that he was getting drafted in there. The problem is he has clearly fallen behind Phillip Lindsay. He is more or less a touchdown or bust candidate at this point. Sort of a handcuff, just kind of like Carlos Hyde. Right. Sort of become a handcuff in the end, averaging pretty close to a little under 10 points a week. And like I said, the only weeks that he had more than that was because he had a touchdown. So at this point, for me, for Royce Freeman, I'll say, I don't think I'd cut him quite yet because he is young. Yeah. He is in his first year. And you may see an uptick if Phillip Lindsay starts struggling a little bit later on in the season. And plus, once again, he's the bruiser at the 1-yard line. But, I mean, there's not much value left there right now. Phillip Lindsay's getting most of the first down carries, the second down carries, and then Booker's getting basically the passing downs. Booker has become the passing down back and has put up decent PPR points in some weeks. So I don't even know where Royce Freeman fits in at this point, but he's young. and he still could take over, especially if you have a Phillip Lindsay on your roster. I wouldn't mind keeping him on your bench, but would you keep Royce Freeman at this point?
At this point, it's kind of no, I wouldn't.
It's tough.
Phillip Lindsay, like you said, has clearly taken over that backfield. He looks better. His yards per carry's up. He gets involved. He actually is involved in the passing game a decent bit. Devontae Booker, they use him sparingly. So Royce Freeman's kind of becoming an odd man out. Granted, he did have a touchdown last week, and like you said, he's pretty much a touchdown boomer bust candidate, kind of like Peyton Barber is at this point. Like, you don't know what you're going to get. 1 week Royce Freeman will have 2 carries for 6 yards. The next week he'll have 13 carries for 38 yards. So even when he does touch the football, it's not like he's creating a lot of magic.
And most of it, like I said, the only time you're getting is if they're at the 1 yard line and Freeman just so happens to be the back that comes in for that goal. So I've seen Lindsay go from the 1 yard line a couple times. Right. So yeah, he's very boomer bust.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with game script too, because the Broncos defense, when they decide to show up and they want to run the football, because that team is built on a ground and pound running game. Yeah, so when the Broncos actually get to play their style of football, which is the ground and pound, control the clock, I think Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman are both good options. But the problem is that defense is not the no-fly zone anymore. They did have a good game against the Cardinals.
Who hasn't at this point?
Right. But prior to that, they were getting gashed for 200-yard rushing games, falling behind quickly, having to turn to the pass, where we've seen Emmanuel Sanders explode this year.
Very much.
So for me, as much as a lot of people were very high on Royce Freeman, they took him as early as the 3rd and 4th rounds in some of their drafts. Again, it's hard to say drop him, but it's also hard to roster someone that is so boomer bust.
And I would like to argue, though, that in the preseason video for the running backs, I warned against taking Royce Freeman that early. Once again, a completely different reason, because I thought Devontae Booker would be the one to do it. But either way, I warned against drafting a guy that high that wasn't a guaranteed starter at that point.
Plus, that backfield is just riddled. It's one of those backfields where any week anyone could go off and anyone could do something. But
I wouldn't do that just because the ESPN person went nuts on Kenyon Drake and saying that no one should have drafted. I told you so. So I went in my "I told you so" moment. That was an "I told you so."
So moving forward, I'm going to go to another guy who is extremely the definition of boomer bust in fantasy.
He always has been.
He always has been. Is DeSean Jackson. Now, the first couple of weeks with Fitzmagic, he was on an absolute tear. He looked like his old self, putting up 25, 30, 40 fantasy points a week. Ever since Jameis Winston's come back, that has not been the case. Now, we all know last year Jameis Winston and DeSean Jackson were not on the same page.
Not even close.
In fact, DeSean Jackson had his worst year from a fantasy output. This year so far with Jameis Winston, it has not been the greatest. They really haven't been connecting. In fact, the only reason DeSean Jackson had a decent week this week is because he had a rushing touchdown. Outside of that, he only had 2 catches for like 30 yards.
That's ugly.
And it is very ugly. So again, DeSean Jackson's another one of those guys that you pretty much, if he doesn't get that deep bomb for a touchdown, it's going to be a very rough outing. And Jameis Winston has shown time and time again, even though he has the arm to do it, he rarely ever takes shots down the field.
Afraid.
And if he does, he usually goes to his bigger safety blanket with Mike Evans. Mm-hmm. So because Mike Evans and DeSean Jackson are both downfield threats, the problem is DeSean Jackson ultimately has the more speed. So when you're throwing a ball with a guy that has that much speed, you have to anticipate it, whereas with someone like Mike Evans, you just throw it up and he'll go get it.
Yeah, Mike Evans can catch almost anything.
Exactly. So for me, again, I know it's hard to even consider dropping DeSean Jackson, and to be honest with you, at this point, you're not going to drop DeSean Jackson. You're definitely going to put him on your bench just to see how things play out. But the problem is you can get sucked in by his stats, because honestly, his stats have looked great.
Yeah. With
Fitzmagic, he's looked good. Jameis Winston's first start back, he had 4 catches for 77 yards. If you're in a PPR league, that's 11 points.
Which is better than a lot.
Right. For a wide receiver 3, like if he's your wide receiver 1, you're in trouble. But if he's your wide receiver 3 or even a flex option, those are great numbers. So for me, I'm not saying drop DeSean Jackson. I'm just saying be extremely cautious with your optimisms when it comes to DeSean Jackson. and just kind of watch and see how it plays out with Jameis Winston.
Yeah, and I bet people who have D-Jax on their roster at this point wishes that they would have went with the trade market after the third week, because his value is back down to normal levels from last year. And look at it, I had DeSean Jackson on my team last year for a couple weeks, and it was hard to play him any week, just because any given week, it didn't matter what the defense was. It could be any week that this guy explodes. You're never going to know. And that's not someone I like having on my roster. And I still don't like that on my roster. So personally, for me, it would be a cut for that. Just because it's hard to have that person on your roster that you're like, he's against a terrible defense. He should do good. And he bombs and doesn't do anything because he never gets a pass. Then, he's against the number one defense in the NFL. I can't play him this week. He just put up 34 points. He's so inconsistent. His numbers don't match up with the opponents and stuff. I would say drop him, just because I personally hate trying to make that choice of when he's going to be good and when he's not.
Unless your team is stacked with Adam Thielen, Todd Gurley, Melvin Ingram, and a bunch of studs, so where you can afford to get a goose egg,
Yeah.
it's very hard to play DeSean Jackson.
Yeah, especially if you did a normal draft and you got one good running back, one top wide receiver, and then everyone else kind of filling up the roster. It's hard for me to say to keep DeSean Jackson, a guy that you're rarely going to play. Let's be honest, you're rarely going to play him if he's on your roster. The only reason to keep him on your roster is if you're in a league that you really think you can get a trade value out of him after a really good week. That's really the only time that I say keep DeSean Jackson. Other than that, if you're in a league with experienced people in leagues, you're not going to get that trade. But if you're in like a beginner league, you might be able to steal something out of that. So I'd say no. But wide receiver name-wise, let's go with another one who is literally only on rosters at this point because of his name. And that is Larry Fitzgerald. His highest, he had 40 yards and 1 touchdown this week against Denver, which was his highest yard total since week 1, where he put up 76 yards. Guess what? It was his first touchdown this season. Larry Fitzgerald he's not the ageless wonder anymore. He is finally looking his age. Kirksey seems to be passing him down there. Not that that's saying much. The Cardinals are a mess right now.
Right.
He does have a favorable schedule. I'll say that before I go on that. He does play the Cardinals play some of the worst defenses out there, but he also has Josh Rosen thrown to him. And Josh Rosen is now maybe the most laughed at quarterback after that. Is ugly even a way to put it for that Thursday night display that he put out there?
For my newest Twitter handle, Josh Rosen facts.
Oh, good God, no. But either way, should we keep Larry Fitzgerald? And that's tough for me. I don't know if you straight up drop him at this point. Once again, there's good matchups coming up that he could be good. But for me, at this point, I go for trade value of names. I don't necessarily drop him, but I'm not playing him either. I'm not playing him any week. I don't trust this Cardinals offense at all. Even David Johnson, they get a new offensive coordinator this week, so you never know. But even David Johnson, I'm struggling to play, and I have him on my roster. I'm going to be struggling to play him and hoping to bring him back in the short passing game. But Larry Fitzgerald's just not getting the looks. He's not getting open, even if he is getting the looks. And this whole Cardinals offense is junk. Name value might be your savior on this one. You might be able to get a trade for a decent wide receiver that no one's talked about, Chris Godwin maybe, or something like that. You might be able to get something like that. But at this point, when the best he could put up is 40 yards and 1 touchdown, his first touchdown of the season, I can't justify keeping Larry Fitzgerald on a roster at that point. Cutting him might not be the best thing right away, trying to trade him for the value, but I just can't see a reason to keep Larry Fitzgerald beyond that.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Josh Rosen.
Josh, that was ugly on Thursday.
If he had and again, Josh Rosen is a rookie. We all know how rookies go through growing pains.
Especially on bad teams.
Right, especially on bad teams where the offensive line's a mess, the running game's a mess, the defense is a mess, everything's a mess.
It's the worst running defense in the league right now.
So, to me, Larry Fitzgerald is a great guy. I mean, he's one of the all-time greatest wide receivers of all time, but at this stage of his career, he's not creating the separation. He's not even really getting the look, because his targets per game has dropped significantly with Josh Rosen in there, because he's been checking it down to Ricky Seals-Jones, using David Johnson sparingly out of the backfield, and his favorite target seems to be Christian Kirk. So, as much as you hate to say it, Larry Fitzgerald is definitely someone that you're not starting. If you are starting him, you got
big problems.
I think I'd rather just start DeSean Jackson at this point.
I agree.
Over Larry Fitzgerald.
It makes you really wish that Larry Fitzgerald had gone out with Carson Palmer last year. If he had just gone and retired and gone to the Hall of Fame last year, because I don't want to say it's ruining his career, but it's a terrible ending, and it would have been a little bit better last year ending with his buddy.
The only saving grace is if somehow, by the sheer grace of the football gods, he is traded to a team that actually could use him. You know, maybe
like the Raiders.
Yeah, the Raiders.
It's tough to find a good wide receiver in this day and age.
That's right. So yeah, if Larry Fitzgerald isn't traded and he's kept on the Cardinals, you can try to trade him and maybe hopefully get like a low-end wide receiver 3 or a flex for him. Maybe, like you said, a Chris Godwin. But I wouldn't trade Chris Godwin for Larry Fitzgerald.
I personally would not at this point. I'd have to be really deep on them players. Like somebody who's getting 5 points a week would be tough for me to get rid of for Larry. I would maybe trade Carlos Hyde for him at this point.
So going from one big name to another big name. My last should you drop of the video is a guy who is currently owned in over 90% of all ESPN fantasy leagues, and that is the Redskins tight end Jordan Reed.
Wow, that's a lot of leagues.
That is a lot of leagues. Now here's a guy who everyone thought if he's healthy, he will be a top 3 tight end, outside of your Travis Kelce's and your Gronkowski's. We all saw what Jordan Reed does when he's healthy. I mean, he is a phenomenal athlete. He can stretch the field. He's got good speed. He has great hands. And they were bringing in Alex Smith, who loves the tight ends. Travis Kelce put up monster numbers with Alex Smith. So prior to this season starting, everyone had huge expectations for Jordan Reed. And the reality is he's had 1 week over 10 fantasy points in a PPR league. How the last 4 weeks he's averaged less than 8 fantasy points, which sadly, I know the tight end position is struggling this year. I know it's been downright disgusting at times, but if you're starting Jordan Reed and you're constantly getting less than 5, 10 fantasy points for a guy that you took probably really high in the draft, or someone that you spent a lot of money on in an auction draft, again, it might be one of those situations where you can get name value out of him and trade him. Because let's be honest, at any given week, Jordan Reed can go off. When he's healthy, which he has been, he's been healthy all year long. There's not been any signs of injury. There's not been any signs of, anything slowing him down. So what's the problem?
And let's talk about it here. So clearly, Jordan Reed's been healthy this year and be able to do it, but something's off. And I think what it is how many years has he been in the league? About 5 years in the league at this point?
5 or 6.
He's been injured every year. I personally think the injuries have caught up to him. I don't think he's the same Jordan Reed that you would have had early last year before the injury 2 years ago as one of the top tight ends in the league and stuff. I think those injuries have finally caught up. And you could make his argument for Gronkowski the same way, that he's not doing the production this year. The injuries take the legs out eventually. He does a lot of blocking too and everything like that. So he may not be hurting per se, but the injuries are catching up on his body and slowing him down as he's getting older up there. So, like you said, I wouldn't drop him at this point, especially because how valuable the tight end position has been this year compared to other years. But I'm also looking for a new tight end at this point. I'm also looking in the trade market. I'm also looking for a CJ Uzoma or something like that out there who's stepped up and is now the only tight end on the roster. I'm looking for someone else to play week in and week out and maybe play Jordan Reed on bye weeks, or maybe play Jordan Reed on weeks where he has great matchups against, say, teams like, I don't know, the Steelers, who are the worst team against tight ends. I'm playing him automatically in a week like that. But for the most part, I don't think you cut Jordan Reed at this point, just because, like we've already said, the tight ends are pretty weak at this year.
Right.
But I also don't trust starting them, and I'm also doing everything I can to get a better tight end. So,
right.
And it's unfortunate that injuries do that to people. So that's all we got for the should you drop them. So now we got our continuation of last week. We looked through a couple of names, then maybe had a good week, maybe had a couple of good weeks, and figured, okay, is this somebody that you should pick up? They're on the market. And my first one, I am stunned when I saw that he was only owned in 8% of leagues going into today. going into this weekend in ESPN, and that's Tyrone Williams. Yes, he struggled in the first couple weeks.
He's pretty much non-existent.
Basically. He was averaging about 8 points a week, if that, for the first week. And then out of nowhere, these last 2 weeks, he's put up over 40 points, probably closer to 50 points in 2 weeks. He has good matchups coming up, but the problem with him and the problem of why I think he's owned in 8%, although it doesn't make much sense to me that he's owned in 8% and Mike Williams is owned in 36%, that is a little weird to me.
Well, but the thing with that is Mike Williams to the start of the season was really hot.
Yeah, he was. And that's where my argument comes in here. I personally will say right now that I think you should pick up Tyrone Williams, especially if you have your DeSean Jackson or someone we talked about, your Larry Fitz, and you're struggling there. The problem with Williams is while I think he's a better option than, say, those two that we talked about earlier, the problem is in San Diego, there is a lot of options to the ball to be thrown. And like I said, we're not just talking about the wide receivers. There's already 3 there with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Tyrone Williams. I'm pretty sure I'm forgetting one.
Travis Benjamin.
Travis Benjamin if he gets healthy.
Antonio Gates.
Well, he's the tight end I was going for. Antonio Gates. And not even that. Then you also throw in Austin Eckler, who has been getting a lot of the passes too.
And Melvin Gordon.
Melvin Gordon's getting a lot of passes. So there's so many options there that Phillip Rivers can only throw to so many people. And I think that's why you're seeing it that Mike Williams exploded the first couple weeks. Now Tyrone Williams is. Keenan Allen's done almost absolutely nothing for the past month. It's hard to say what week to play him because you don't know who Phillip Rivers is going to connect with that week. Right. With that being said, I think he's a better option than Mike Williams right now. I think he's a better option than the ones we talked about. And if you're desperate for a receiver, heck, we got our biggest bye week coming up this week. If you're desperate for a receiver for it, you could, although is he on the bye week? Is Chargers on the bye week this week? I don't remember if they're on the bye.
I think
they might be. Well, you still could do worse than Tyrone Williams on that.
Which, honestly, if you're going to pick up Tyrone Williams, now's the time to do it because they are on a bye. So, because of that, you can probably pick him up either this week or maybe even next week if you don't want to, if you can't really roster him right now, since they're on a bye, most people probably aren't going to be looking at him as much. So, you could potentially, if you don't want to run the risk and you don't really have the roster spot, you can maybe hold off till next week, but you may take a big risk with that.
Yep.
Again, my biggest thing with Tyrone Williams, I think it's going to be the Williams effect in Los Angeles. You know, you have Mike Williams, you have Tyrone Williams. Which one of them is going to play? Which one of them is going to go off? You don't really know because in week 3, if you said pick up Tyrone Williams, you were crazy because Mike Williams was a world beater.
Yep, Mike Williams looked like he basically knocked him out.
Now, you say pick up Tyrone Williams because he looks like the world beater, and Mike Williams, who did have a touchdown, by the way.
A very nice touchdown, too.
A very nice touchdown. Who could, at any point, take back over that role. Because let's be honest, right now, Keenan Allen is the number 1 wide receiver.
No matter how bad he's looked recently.
No matter how bad he's looked. You know, Travis Benjamin has fallen because of injuries and just lack of playing time. So the number 2 and number 3 guy are the Williams brothers. You have Tyrell, you have Mike Williams. They're basically back and forth, interchangeable between 2 and 3. They do line up. The nice thing about Tyrell Williams that they don't really use a lot of Mike Williams is they line them up all over the place. Typically, Mike Williams is usually an outside guy. They kind of use him as that deep threat, which we've seen Tyrell Williams be the last couple of weeks. So I'm saying you should definitely pick up Tyrell Williams because, to be honest with you, at this point, he's worth starting over, like you said, DeSean Jackson, Larry Fitz, and just to see where it goes. Do you expect him to put up 100 yards and a touchdown every week? No.
Especially when Keenan Allen starts getting hot, because it will happen. Keenan Allen
later,
will get hot here soon.
And you're also going to have your weeks where it's the Melvin Gordon show, and he goes off for 3 touchdowns, and Phillip Rivers throws for like 200 yards. You're going to have those weeks.
Yep.
So you have to temper expectations, but I do think he's definitely someone moving forward you should probably have.
A good wide receiver 3 flex option for your team, for sure.
So a guy that I'm going to ask, should you pick up? We all know that Chris Thompson has been injured. He has been week to week. Now, the first week he was out against the Panthers, Capri Bibb stepped in. He was supposed to be the guy. He fell flat on his face. He had like 6 carries for less than 10 yards. He had 1 catch for 2 yards. So he didn't really do much that first week. The second week, Chris Thompson was out. This last week, Capri Bibbs kind of exploded on the scene. He had several catches for like 70 yards and a touchdown. He ran the football decently, but most of the early down work kind of went to Adrian Peterson. So is Capri, as long as Chris Thompson is out, is Capri Bibbs someone you should have on your roster? Because again, he could be like last week where he did get that touchdown, he had a decent amount of catches, he had close to 20-some fantasy points, or is it going to be like when he played the Panthers and he had less than 5 fantasy points?
Yeah, and I'd say there's only 2 situations where you get Capri Bibbs on your team. For one, if you had running backs like Jay Ajayi, Dalvin Cook, and stuff like that, and you're really struggling, you're week to week with running backs, and believe me, that's one thing you do not want to be in fantasy. You do not want to be in this week to week position because then you failed at that part, and you're going to have to make trades or something. But if you are stuck in that week to week thing, then yeah, he's not bad worth signing right there. With that being said, well, for all we know, Chris Thompson's back this week and it's over. The number 2 spot is the handcuff spot. Obviously, if Chris Thompson's one of your top running backs in your roster and you need the handcuff there for it to cover for him, then yeah, Capri Bibbs is 100% a rosterable spot. But really, outside of those 2 reasons, I don't think he's really worth it if you already have starting running backs for every week and you're set in that position. He's not worth even a roster spot because he's not going to do much more than be a handcuff, and he's not going to be starter at any point. Unless Adrian Peterson goes out, and even then, I'm not convinced he'll be the starter there. It'll probably go to Samaje Perine. It'll probably go to him over anyone. So, personally for me, there's only those 2 situations. Other than that, keep him on the bench. Or keep him on the bench, yeah. Keep him on the free agency wire. Right. Good. So, I'm going to go quarterback. And I'm going to go Baker Mayfield at this point. Now, quarterbacks, a lot of time, they're the opposite of running backs. I just said running backs, if you have to go interchangeable each week, you're in trouble. Quarterbacks, I mean, most of them are very similar numbers. Most of the time, you can get a pretty decent quarterback 2 minutes before the game starts, in all honesty. But Baker Mayfield has put up some pretty good numbers. He's averaging roughly around 20, so right around where Matt Stafford's going right now, points per week, right around where Jared Goff's been for the last couple of weeks. So he's putting up good numbers in there. But that's not the reason I brought him up here. Baker Mayfield, next 4 weeks, so technically next 5 weeks because there is a bye week in there. The next 5 weeks, the teams he plays is Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Atlanta, and Cincinnati. 4 of the lowest end defenses in the NFL, passing defenses specifically in the NFL. Would you sign Baker Mayfield with that schedule coming up in the next 5 weeks?
It really depends on the quarterback you have on your roster. I mean, if you're sitting there with a Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, no. However, if you have a Jared Goff on your team, I think that might be something to consider because I love Jared Goff. I had Jared Goff on my team. I traded him.
I wonder who got him.
Right? But the thing with that is, when you have a football team that has an extremely potent running game, like the Rams have, Jared Goff could have 10, 15 fantasy points because they just don't need him because, Todd Gurley decided to go off for 5 touchdowns. And we've seen it in the past.
We have.
And with Cooper Kupp being hurt, that lowers Goff's value. So if you're sitting there with someone like Jared Goff, and maybe you want to take a flyer on Baker Mayfield, absolutely. If you were one of the unlucky people that have Blake Bortles on your roster, I think Baker Mayfield...
I think Baker Mayfield's a must-sign at that point.
A must-sign. If you're in a 2-quarterback league, I definitely think Baker Mayfield should be signed if he's not already. Like you said, those 4 games right there are all great matchups. Especially,
it gets tough after that. But.
It does, but you know what? If you're on a 4-game stretch where you desperately need a quarterback and your quarterback has some tough matchups ahead, I don't know. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to put faith. I mean, Baker Mayfield against the Bucs put over 20 fantasy points. We all know this Browns team is different. The environment's different. The atmosphere is different. They're more competitive.
The running back's different.
The running backs are different. I definitely think that moving forward, Baker Mayfield should definitely be on a roster. And if you're in a keeper in a dynasty league,
oh yeah,
you need to have Baker Mayfield on your roster because he's only going to get better with more playing time. The Browns are going to start slowly building pieces around him. I mean, he does have a number 1 with Jarvis Landry. He does have, in my opinion, an elite tight end in David Njoku. Even though they don't really use him that much, he's still probably one of the best tight ends in the game.
Yeah, my one argument to that, you hit the nail on the head for pretty much all of it. My one argument is, even if you do have your Aaron Rodgers, even if you do have your Ben Roethlisberger, who's been lights out so far this year. Even if you do have one of those ones, I still think Baker Mayfield has value if you have the roster spot for it, just because with those 4 games, there's a very high chance that he's going to put up monster numbers in 4 games in a row. It may not happen at Steelers. We've seen sometimes their defense shows, sometimes it doesn't, but it may not. But with all that, you may get some trade value out of him. You may, if he has 3 of those games, and people who don't really look at the schedules coming up, who are just like, I'm putting this guy in because he's done good for 3 weeks in a row. If he's putting up 25, 30 points 3 weeks in a row, you could probably get some good trade out of it at that point. And I don't want to throw names out because names could change in 3 weeks with injuries and such and trades that may or may not happen. But this could be your chance to say, if you got an Aaron Rodgers, but your running back core is being led by David Johnson right now, this could be your chance to possibly get a decent tier 2 running back, maybe even flex running back, whatever. But this could be your chance if he does have those breakouts. So I can make an argument either way for Baker Mayfield to sign no matter what if you have the roster spot.
All right, so to wrap things up with the should you pick up, we are going to have some fun with this one.
I can't even believe he's even making a list.
I know.
Didn't we just say cut him like 3 weeks ago?
So should you, as of right now, Derrick Henry is owned in 48% of all ESPN.
Fell under 50.
He fell under 50. Now last week he finally had his first touchdown.
Breakout game.
His breakout game, which basically he concluded to 60 yards total, rushing and receiving, and a touchdown. So he had over 16 fantasy points for the first time this season.
How high was he drafted again in drafts?
And again, this is a guy that most people took probably late second, early third round because of the hype of Derrick Henry. Now I know a lot.
I fell into that one. I'm not gonna lie.
A lot of people did. A lot of people believed in Derrick Henry. Like, you know, when DeMarco Murray retired, everyone's like, "This is the Derrick Henry show. He is going to be the only running back." And then the Titans pulled a swerve and got Dion Lewis, and people started to go, "Well, you know, obviously Dion Lewis is the pass catching back, so Derrick Henry is still going to have a lot of value." What we have seen has not been the case. The guy, through 8 weeks, has not gone over 60 rushing yards.
That's awful.
That is awful.
That's terrible.
This is a guy, again.
First round pick.
Yes, he is a top running back that they took in the draft, and he is not putting it together. Now, if you are in desperation, I'm talking complete desperation. Like if your running back situation is, I don't know.
You have your running backs are Jay Ajayi, Carlos Hyde, and Dalvin Cook are your running backs.
If you have them, and you're looking at the waiver roster, and Derrick Henry's there, you might just want to retire from fantasy football.
I will say though that the person in our fantasy league who did have Jay Ajayi, Dalvin Cook, and that sucks, but did have Jay Ajayi. They signed Derrick Henry last week and immediately cut him before even playing him. So even in that situation, Derrick Henry was not chosen. I mean, in all honesty, I can just replay Brim's whole rant from 2 weeks ago, and that would cover it still pretty well. Derrick Henry's not worth a spot.
No,
like I said, you have to be, you literally have to be fully desperate, fully ignore everything you've seen so far with the Titans, not just him, the Titans' whole offense. Ignore that all. Ignore the fact that is desperate for a running back, so desperate for a running back that you're not even going to go with any of these young guys that are starting, that Derrick Henry is a name and you'll take him.
And to make matters worse, if you look at the Titans' up-and-coming schedule, they play, in their next 6 games, they play 4 top 10 run defenses.
So yes, I know exactly Derrick Henry now if you play against me.
If you have a team riddled with bye weeks and injuries, and you need a Hail Mary punt play, please, dear God, let this running back do something, then yes.
I'd probably go Dion Lewis at that point. I'd probably go, if you're desperate, if you need that Titans running back on your roster, and you're a Titans fan, and you need a Titans running back on your roster, go Dion Lewis.
Or, you know what, But call ESPN, let them put Mariota in the running back spot, and then you'll probably still have more points.
Probably would. Oh, Derrick Henry's junk.
So
oh my goodness.
So we're gonna wrap up the video with our bold predictions this week.
And I'll cover for Bryn then. So after the Sean goes.
All right, so I'm gonna go first. We talked about Baker Mayfield. We talked about the Steelers defense being atrocious. So here's my bold prediction: the Browns this Sunday in Pittsburgh will put up over 500 yards of offense.
Wow, that's bold.
Nick Chubb is going to have 6 carries for 200 yards.
Only 6 carries?
6 carries, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Who's going to do all the carry in there?
And Baker Mayfield is going to throw for over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns.
6 touchdowns. 42 points. How many did the Steelers score, though?
The Steelers are going to score 35. So the final score is going to be 42-35.
No field goals either.
No field goals because field goals are for wussies.
Well, then how many punts are going to happen in this game?
None.
No punts. Every drive to score.
Yes.
Man, I don't think those numbers add up that well. I'll just put it in my computer. I'll go with mine and then I'll close with Bryn's. I say there's going to be an NFL record this week, and I think it's going to be an NFL record for passing yards in a game. I don't know, yours is getting pretty close to that too. Passing yards. But I think in the Rams and Packers matchup, I think we'll have an NFL record of 1,250 passing yards in that game. The record right now is 1125.
You do remember Todd Gurley plays for the Rams, right?
Yes, but it's
Todd Gurley will throw.
So what will happen is the Packers will take the lead, take a 21-0 lead in the first quarter. The Rams will make a comeback, and then it'll just turn into a shootout from there. Probably end up to being like 62-50 or something like that. And there will be 1,250 pass yards because both run games will be abandoned. Yes, Todd Gurley will be abandoned in this game.
Will Todd Gurley throw for a touchdown?
3. But no, he'll catch at least 7. Yeah, because they always throw it to him. Yeah. But with that being said, we got Bryn's bold prediction. And I got, hold on, let me read it real quick here. Oh, yes. So basically it is that the Chicago Bears will not give up another point for the next 6 weeks. Chicago Bears will shut out every single opponent in the next 6 weeks. Bryn, wow. They're going good. And if they don't, I will lose 5 points in my game picks. I mean, I have it right here, folks. See right there. I have it. So, and wow, he's just going insane in this pick. But Bryn, that's bold. I'll give you that. Bold. That's the most bold I've heard yet.
That is bold.
Wow.
So that is our fantasy tips for this week. Please like and subscribe our videos, and we will be back next week with our Week 9 game picks. And hopefully Bryn will be back. Maybe Le'Veon will actually report to camp.
It's going to happen someday.
So if Le'Veon Bell reports to camp, Bryn will be back. If not, maybe Bryn will be back.
And he'll lose 5 more picks this game. Le'Veon Bell doesn't report this week.
That was the stigma of being on Le'Veon Bell watch. So please like and subscribe our videos. We are the Fantasy Forecasters, and we predicted just as good as the weatherman.